Chapter 18 of Mad Barbara by Warwick Deeping. Chapter 18. My Lord Gore came to the supper-table in the best of tempers, welding fatherliness, gallantry, and wit into one and the same humour. After a glance at his debonair and handsome face, the veriest night-hawk out of Newgate might have declared him a great gentleman, a pillar of the state, and upholder of all chivalry. No man could be more gracious when the wine had no sour edge to it. He could dance a child to the ceiling, laugh like a boy, and make the majority of young maids fall in love with him with a tremor of romance. In the world it is too often self that is served, and the gallant courtier may be a bear at home. My Lord Gore was a man charmed with his own charm. It pleased him to shine upon people, to radiate warmth, to be looked upon as generous and splendid by men of duller manners. Yet he could act generously, and not always with an eye to personal effect. The plague came when his own comfort or his self-love were menaced. Then the great gentleman, the classic courtier, showed the crust of Cain beneath silks and velvets and coats of arms. Cross him, and Stephen Gore's stateliness became a power to crush instead of to propitiate. He could be brutal with a courtly, sneering facility that was more dangerous than the blundering anger of a rough and clumsy nature. For though every man with the normal passions in him may be a potential Cain, it is chiefly in the two extremes of brutishness and luxurious refinement that one meets with that savage intolerance of the rights of others, and it must be confessed that in the matter of sheer selfishness the poet has often eclipsed the boor. At the supper-table Anne Purcell spoke of Barbara's singing. Who was considered the best master, and did my lord prefer the Italian manner? "For a man, yes," he answered quickly, "if he has a bull's chest on him. But give me a Frenchman to teach a woman to sing love-songs. That is the fashion for Proserpine, when Master Pluto has gone a-farming." He winked at Barbara over his wine, looking very bland and fatherly, with his lips rounded as though he were saying Oporto to his own comfort. "You might try the girl's voice after supper, Stephen." My lord was very ready. He had a bass of rich compass, like the voice of a popish priest chanting in some glorious choir. Herrick should be the man for Barbara. Soft, delicate lyrics, with an amorous droop of the eyelids. Poor Lionel was too fond of the old cavalier ditties. Barbara looked at him with sombre, widely opened eyes. It was not often of late that she had heard him speak her father's name, and that night it woke a flare of exultant anger in her, because of the touch of patronage, as though the dead could always be safely pitied. "Well, then, let us go to the music-room," said her mother. "I will ring to have candles lit." My lord wiped his mouth daintily, and laughed. "Next month there will be no lights needed, but chaste Diana peeping through the casements and wishing she was not cursed with so prudish a reputation." They wandered out into the garden, where a great slant of golden light came over the trees and made the grass vivid, even to violet in the shadows. Barbara walked a little apart, like one whose thoughts went silently to meet the night. Now and again she glanced at my lord, when his eyes were off her, with an earnestness that might have puzzled him had he noticed it. It was Mrs. Jael who came out with the tinder-box and lit the candles in the music-room. Barbara watched her through the window, noticing, almost unconsciously, the woman's double chin, and loose, lying, voluble mouth. She was watching Mrs. Jael when my lord took her by the elbow playfully, and turned her toward the portico. "Come, Mistress Jet and Ivory, we must see how you fancy Parson Herrick." Anne Purcell went in after them, Mrs. Jael standing back as my lady entered. "You can send the people to bed early, Jael." "Yes, my lady," and the confidential creature passed out. Yet what she did was to fly up to Mistress Barbara's room, so that her breath came in short wheezes, unlock the coffer, grope therein tentatively, relock it, and hurry down again with a complacent smirk on her fat face. For Mrs. Jael had a sense of the dramatic where self was concerned, and could keep a shut mouth, despite her loquacity, till the occasion should come when she could most magnify herself by opening it. She went out again into the garden, where it was already growing dusk, and, crossing the grass softly, stood at one corner of the music-room, where she could wait to hear whether her prophecies were likely to be realized. My lord had established himself on the settle with the scarlet cushion, and was playing an aria, the rings on his fingers glancing in the candle-light. The mirror had been taken from the wall above the harpsichord. In the window-seat Anne Purcell showed a full-lipped, round-chinned profile ready to be outlined by the rising moon, while on the high-backed chair beside the door sat Barbara, quiet and devout as any novice. "Sing us that song of Mr. Pepys's, Stephen. Beauty Advance, eh? A wicked wag, that Admiralty fellow. I have watched him in church, trying to discover which girl in the congregation would make the prettiest beatitude. A dull song, very, for so lively a gossip." My lord had a habit of turning his head and looking over his shoulder, as though he never for one moment forgot his audience. "Well, has Proserpine a word to say?" Barbara gave him her sombre eyes at noon. "There are my father's songs." My lord struck a false note on the harpsichord. "Some old cavalier ditty, fusty as a buff coat. No, my dear, we have forgotten how to carry a bandolier." "Let the girl try something. Teach her one of the playhouse songs." Barbara sat with one hand in her bosom. "There is an old song I remember," she said, with the far-away look of one calling something to mind. My lord paused and glanced at her. "What do you call it?" She met his eyes. "The Chain of God." "The name has slipped my memory. How does it run?" Barbara leaned against the high back of her chair. She looked steadily at Stephen Gore, every fibre in her tense as the fibres of a yew bow bent by an English arm. "My love has left me a chain of gold. That is the first line." My lord furrowed his forehead thoughtfully. Go on. I catch nothing of it yet." "My love has left me a chain of gold with a knot of pearls for a token. It came from his hand when that hand was cold and the heart within him broken." There was a short silence in the music-room, the flames of the candles swaying this way and that as though some one moving had sent a draught upon them. My lord turned with a laugh that had no mirth in it. "A dreary ditty. Where did you come by that song?" She answered him with 3 words. "In this room." My lady's silks rustled in the window-seat like the sound of trees shivering in autumn. "What moods the girl has!" My lord kept his eyes on Barbara. "Is there any more of that song?" "There was only one verse to it till I found another." "So?" "For to match that chain there were 3 other chains, and they were sewn upon a black coat with a lining of purple silk, the cloak Captain John wore the night he fought Lord Pembroke." My lord pushed back the settle very slowly. His face was in the shadow, but for all that it was not pleasant to behold. "Has the child these mad fits often?" he asked, with a jerk of the chin. "She will be wishing Jack at Newgate next." Barbara would not take her eyes from him to glance in the direction of her mother. Had she looked at Anne Purcell she would have seen a plump, comely woman grown old suddenly, and trying to make anger shine through fear. "The cloak did not belong to John Gore, my lord, nor did he know that I have the chain from it that I found in my father's hand." She rose suddenly, and, swinging the chair before her, knelt with one knee on it, and steadied her elbow on the back. "Father lay over there, near the table. There is a stain on the floor still, though Mrs. Jael was set to scrub. It was I who found him, you may remember that." They both looked at her askance, cowed and caught at a disadvantage for the moment by this knowledge that she had and by her hardiness in accusing. "My dear young madam, you had better go to bed." Her bleak imperturbability turned my lord's sneer aside like granite. "Here is the chain from your cloak. I give it back to you now that it has served its purpose." She flung out her hand, and the chain fell close to my Lord Gore's feet. He did not even trouble to look at it, as though he had no wish to appear seriously concerned. "We appear to be judge, jury, and witness, all in one," he said. "Come down off that chair, my dear, and don't be foolish." He spoke with an air of amused impatience, but there was something in his eyes that made her know the truth of what she had said. "You have always thought me a little mad, my lord." "No, assuredly not. Only a little strange in your appreciation of a joke. Nan, stay quiet." Barbara had put her hands into her bosom, given one glance behind her, and then levelled a pistol at my lord's breast. The high-backed chair and the settle were scarcely 4 paces apart. "I made a promise to myself that I would find out the man who killed my father. When I discovered it, I bought these pistols." My lady had risen from the window-seat, and was standing with her arms spread, her open mouth a black oval, as though she were trying to speak and could not. "Mother, do not move. I will beseech my Lord of Gore to tell me the truth before I pull the trigger." The great gentleman looked at her like a man dumbfounded, hardly able to grasp the meaning of that steel barrel and that little circle of shadow that held death in the compass of a thumb's nail. "Assuredly I will tell you the truth," he said at last. "Then let me hear it." He grappled himself together, gave a glance at my lady, who had sunk again into the window-seat, and then met Barbara eye to eye. "Since you seek the truth at the pistol's point, my child, I will tell it you, though no man on earth should have dragged it from me at the sword's point. Good God!" and he put his hand to his forehead, and looked from mother to daughter as though unwilling to speak, even under such compulsion. Barbara watched him, believing he was gaining leisure to elaborate some lie. "You are determined to hear everything?" She nodded. "Have it then, girl, to your eternal shame. Why should the unclean, disloyal dead make the living suffer? Much good may the truth do all of us, for none are without our sins." He spoke out in a few harsh, solemn words, words that were meant to carry the sorrow and the travail and the anger of a great heart. It was the same tale that he had told John Gore, yet emphasized more grimly to suit the moment. And when he had ended it, he put his head between his hands and groaned, and then looked up at Barbara as though trying to pity her for the shock of his confession. "Is that everything?" She was white and implacable. My lord's lower lip drooped a little. "Is it not enough?" "Of lies, yes." He looked in her eyes, and then gave a deep, fierce cry, like the cry of a wild beast taken in the toils. It was done within a flash, before he could cross the space that parted them. He stumbled against the chain that she had thrown down toward him, and as the echoes sped, and the smoke and the draught made the candles flicker, Barbara fell back against the wall, her hand dropping the pistol and going to her bosom for the consummation of it all. "Mercy of me! My dear, mercy of me! What have you done?" She found Mrs. Jael clinging to her and holding her arms with all her strength. Barbara tried to shake the woman off, but could not for the moment. Then, quite suddenly, as the smoke cleared, she ceased her striving and leaned against the wall, her eyes staring incredulously over Mrs. Jael's head, as the little woman clung to her and pinioned her with her arms. For though my Lord Gore had fallen back against the table with a great black blur on his blue coat, and the lace thereof smouldering, he stood unhurt, with my lady holding to one arm, and looking up with terror into his face. "Safe, Nan," he said, very quietly, being a man of nerve and courage. "Where the bullet went, God only knows." A grey fog came up before Barbara's eyes. She stood like one dazed, yet feeling the warmth of Mrs. Jael's bosom as the woman still clung to her. Then her muscles relaxed, and her face fell forward on Mrs. Jael's shoulder. Stephen Gore put the mother aside, and, striding forward, thrust his hand into Barbara's bosom. He drew out the second pistol, looked at it with a grim, inquiring smile, and then laid it upon the table. "The child must be clean mad," he said, with admirable self-control, and a glance full of meaning at my lady and Mrs. Jael. "Oh, the poor dear! Oh, the poor dear!" To raise her hand against such a gentleman without cause or quarrel! Her wits must have gone. I feared it for many weeks." Stephen Gore pondered a moment, looking at Barbara's bowed head with a look that boded nothing good for her. "Get her to her room, Nan. Keep the servants out of the way. We don't want any pother over the child's madness. Understand me there. For her sake we can hold our tongues." Mrs. Jael looked at him as though he were a saint. "Poor dear! To think of it!" My lady and the woman took Barbara by either arm. She lifted her head and looked for a moment at my lord, and then went with them meekly, as though dazed and without heart. Whispering together behind her back, they led her across the garden and up the staircase to her own room. When they had locked the door on her, Anne Purcell laid a hand on Mrs. Jael's arm, and they went together into my lady's chamber. Chapter 19 of Mad Barbara by Warwick Deeping. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19 When Anne Purcell returned to the music room, she found my lord waiting for her there, walking to and fro with his hands behind his back and his handsome face lined and shadowed with thought. He looked up quickly when she entered, a look full of infinite meaning, as though he had felt a chill of loneliness, and was glad that this woman shared with him what the future might convey. He closed the door and casements carefully, after walking round the garden to see that no one was lurking there. Anne Purcell's face still looked white and scared. The horror of a betrayal haunted her as she went to the window-seat, where the moonlight was already glimmering upon the glass. "Speak softly. I had better draw the curtains." He did so, leaning over my Lady Anne, and stooping to kiss her before he drew away. Restlessness seemed in his blood, for he kept walking to and fro as they talked, pausing sometimes as though to think. "Does the woman Jael know anything of this?" "She knows everything. It was she who saved your life by tampering with the charges." "She knew the girl had pistols?" "Yes, by watching through the hole in the wainscoting. She saw where Barbara kept them, and found a key to fit the coffer. Jael seemed to have foreseen something, for tonight she found that the pistols were no longer there." My lord turned to the table where the steel barrels glistened in the candlelight. He picked them up and looked at them closely, a deep pucker of thought upon his forehead. "Who would have thought that the girl had so much devil in her? I tell you, Nan, she must have been playing with us all these years, watching and waiting and pretending to be asleep. And it was a narrow thing, by God! But for that woman of yours, I should be lying there where—" He did not complete the sentence, but broke off abruptly, for the conscious shock seemed to strike him more heavily now the intensity of the moment had passed. He looked white about the mouth, and his eyes had a hard, scared wrath in them that made them ugly. Anne Purcell turned on the window-seat to look at him, and then covered her face with her hand. "She said that the stain is still there. And it is—" "Fiddle-faddle! What of that, Nan?" And the evil spirit in him flashed out fiercely. "The girl has cornered us. It is no time for whimpering." He recovered his serene and cynical poise almost instantly, and, putting 2 fingers in the pocket of his embroidered vest, drew out the curb of gold with its knot of pearls. "This little thing came very near ending everything. I shall give it no second chance. Like the easy fool I am, I put that cloak away and forgot it, never suspecting that I had left such a clue behind. Jack turned it out of an old chest when he came home shirtless from sea, and wore it that night at Hortense's. It was only when we got home that I noticed the thing, and talked him into surrendering it. She must have cross-questioned him. And by the prophets of Israel, Jack was near having a bullet in his heart. She said she told him nothing. God grant that's true. Jack's a man with a tight mouth, and a kind of grimness that sails straight in the face of a storm." He paused, staring hard at the flame of one of the candles, and tossing the chain up and down in his palm. "What are you going to do, Stephen?" "Do?" And his face darkened, although so close to the light. "Keep the Spanish fury out of danger. What can you desire?" She stretched out an arm to him, her face rigid with dread. "No, not again, Stephen. I cannot bear it. I will not." "There, there," and he laughed. "How you women leap at conclusions! There is no such serious need. But I value my neck too much, and yours, my dear, to let her run at large." "Then how?" He looked down at her steadily. "The girl is mad." "Barbara!" "Yes, mad, poor thing, as a March hare. Mad. Drink the word in, and live on it. Mad, mad. This wild scarecrow of a suspicion is nothing but a shadow on the brain, a shadow of distortion and madness brought on by poor Lionel's death. There are some of us to swear to that, and our words carry more weight and volume than the ravings of a girl. Mrs. Jael must be worth her money. The whole affair will be very simple. Thank heaven, son Jack is in the country. I can bleed him and doctor him when he returns." Anne Purcell watched him with a trace of wonder in her eyes. The man was so many-sided, such an actor, such a cynic. Then she must be treated as one gone mad, yet discreetly and gently, as though the family niceness were to be considered. No idle talking, no news about town. Yet being dangerous, even perhaps against herself, mark that, Nan, she must be put under soft restraint in some quiet corner where she can do no harm. He spoke so shrewdly, and with such a meaning between the words, that Anne Purcell again looked scared. "No whips, Stephen, and all those things. I have heard—" "Tush, my love, am I a fool?" "But—" He opened his arms to her, with an impulse of tenderness and strong appeal. "Now, sweetheart, trust me. We have been too much to each other, you and I. Look at me, Nan. What I am because you are what you are. We are on the edge of a cliff. Don't tell me that I must drag you over." He played to the woman in her, yet not without real feeling. She rose to him, and for a moment he had her in his arms. "There, you understand, Nan, why I want to live. It is for your sake as well as mine, though I shall not see 50 again. We cannot help ourselves. And I tell you the girl is mad. I have said so to others before it came to this." My lord put her gently out of his arms, and led her with some majesty back to the window-seat. "You must know, Nan, that this will be de prerogativa regis. That is to say, it will be the chancellor's affair, and he is an easy man to manage. As to a private inquiry, we can probably slip by it with Christian discretion. The point is that the unfortunate subject is confined in custody under the care of her nearest friends or kinsfolk." Anne Purcell began to understand. "But there may still be danger in it." "No, trust me, very little. It can be done quietly. There is your place of Thorn." "Thorn? Why, it is half in ruins, and no one ever goes there." "Nan, my sweet, are you a fool?" "No, Stephen, but—" "The country air, and food, and contact with some simple couple. What more could the poor wench wish for? An old house in the deeps of Sussex, 7 miles from a town. Why, it is made for such a case." She looked at him helplessly, for her selfish worldliness had received a shock that night. "There is no other way?" "None, unless you wish to feel a silk rope round your neck, my dear." They said little more that night, my lord putting on a cloak to hide his powder-blackened coat, and kissing her very kindly before he went. He gave her a few words of warning, commended Mrs. Jael to her, and spoke of the money that should be forthcoming. Barbara was to see no one but Mrs. Jael and her mother. They were to keep her locked in her room till my lord should bring a physician whom he could trust to inquire into the state of the girl's mind. Yet there was one thought that haunted Stephen Gore as he walked home alone by the light of the moon without a single torch to keep him company and scare away footpads. It was possible that the girl might turn against herself. and though he tried not to hanker after the chance, he knew how it would simplify the tangle. Barbara's window stood some height from the ground, and there were no bars to it. My lord remembered these details before he went to bed. He was careful to show the man Rogers his blackened coat, and to tell him that he had been fired at by some villain, and that the ball had missed him by some mercy of God. Mrs. Jael came down from her attic next day soon after dawn, her eyes red and suffused, her bosom full of sentimental sighings. She went about the house, blubbering ostentatiously in odd corners, dabbing with her handkerchief, and setting all the servants spying on her. Yet all she would say was, "Poor dear, poor sweet! The brain is turned over in her, and so young, too. I always was afeard of it, she took it so to heart. Oh, dear Lord, what a sad world it is, surely. The poor child's made me 10 years older." And then she would shuffle away, jerking her fat shoulders and trying to smother sobs, so that every servant in the house knew that something strange had happened, and were ready to hear of anything, and to accept it as an interesting fact. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Mad Barbara by Warwick Deeping. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20. John Gore, riding over the yellow stubbles with some burly farmer at his side, seemed very far from the stately littleness of Whitehall. For, next to the open sea, John Gore had always loved the open country, either moor, field, or forest, so long as the eye could take in some sweeping distance. He loved also the smell of the soil, the byres, and the old farmhouses with the scent of the hay and the fragrant breath of cattle at milking time. Much of his boyhood clung to the memories of it all, where the play of lights and shadows upon the moors made the purples and greens and gold as glorious as the colours of sky and sea at sunset. John Gore had inherited these Yorkshire lands from his mother, who had been able to will them to him by right of title. Her marriage with Lord Gore had not been a happy one, for he had been too desirous of pleasing all women, while she was a lady of sweet earnestness, who would have given her heart's blood for a man had he been worthy. Her character appeared to have mastered my lord's, for her nature ousted his from the soul of their only child, a boy, John Gore. She had died in her Junetide, while the lad was schooling at the great school of Winchester, leaving her property in trust for him till he should come of age. Shirleys, for such was the name of the manor house and the park, had been leased to a city merchant, a man who had trudged to London as a Yorkshire lad, and driven out of it as Sir Peter in a coach and six. The farms and holdings were under the eye of a steward, Mr. Isaac Swindale, a lawyer at Tadcaster. The whole estate was worth a good sum yearly to John Gore, and it was with the money, therefore, that he had bought and fitted out the Sparhawk, and sailed in her as gentleman adventurer into the strange seas. John Gore passed some days at Shirleys as Sir Peter Hanson's guest, for his mother had died in the old house, and he had wished to see the place after the passing of 3 years. Perhaps his heart went out the more to the memory of that dead mother because she had taught him to reverence women, and given him that most precious thing that a man can have, the power to love deeply and with all the tenderness that makes love stronger even than death. The gardens and the walks were just as in his mother's day, for John Gore had stipulated that nothing should be meddled with, and the flowering shrubs and the herb borders were there as she had left them. The spirit of the place seemed full of sympathy for him that September. Its memories had a restfulness that touched him even more than of old, for he thought of his mother bending her pale, serious face over the rose bushes, and the green ferns where the roach pool lay seemed more dear and vivid to him because of that other thing that had taken birth within his heart. He felt that he would have given much to have walked with his mother through those little coppices and the green aisles of the orchard, where the Lent lilies dashed the April winds with gold, and to have talked to her as a son can sometimes talk to a mother, even though he be a grown man, with the tan of the wide world upon his face. So near did her spiritual presence seem to him that he would not go to kneel before the stately tomb in the chantry at the church, feeling that she lived in the place that she had loved, and not under that mass of alabaster and of marble that covered the mere dust. For John Gore had found the one woman in the world who could make the heart grow great with awe in him, as with the awe of unsailed seas. It was sweet even to be so far away from her that he might feel the dream lure drawing him amid those Yorkshire moors. The memory of his mother shared in the tenderness thereof, as though she had breathed into him at birth that soul of hers that could love even in sadness and regret. John Gore spent 2 weeks upon his land, walking in the gardens and the park of Shirleys, and talking to Sir Peter of the great ships and the trade routes and doings of the Dutch in the East Indies. Sir Peter and his wife were a grave and homely couple without children, whose simple dignity hurt none of his recollections. Or he would ride over the various farms, finding old friends among the farmers and the men, inquiring into his tenants' affairs, and ready to sit down and take his dinner in the great kitchens with the country folk and their children. For John Gore was more at home in an ingle-nook, with some little Yorkshire maid on his knee, than idling in his father's painted salon with a score of somebodies trying to seem more splendid and more witty than either their estates or their brains could justify. Now John Gore dreamed a quaint dream the last night that he lay at Shirleys, in the very room where his mother had died. He dreamed that he was at sea again, and sitting in the stern sheets of a boat that was being rowed in toward an unknown shore. It was all vivid and real to him, the heave of each billow under the boat, the dash through the surf, the men leaping out and dragging the boat up on the sand. He crossed the beach alone, drawing toward a little grove of palms whose green plumes were clear and breathless against a tropical sky. And as he neared the grove a woman came out from among the straight boles of the palm trees, and that woman was his mother. There is no astonishment in dreams, and John Gore went toward her as though she had not known death, and as though there was nothing strange in finding her there where palm trees grew in lieu of elms and birches. But she held up her hands to him and cried, "Go back, go back!" Then there was a sound like the ringing shot of a carbine, and he woke in the room at Shirleys, wondering whether there were thieves in the house, and whether the old merchant knight had used a musket or a pistol upon the marauders. Yet though believers in dreams might have sworn that his brain had caught an echo of some tragedy that concerned him deeply, how little John Gore thought of the dream may be judged by the fact that he went back to bed, after sallying forth with a candle and a horse-pistol to reconnoitre, and slept till the servant drew back the curtains to let in the sun. For the episode of Barbara Purcell's expiation had become a thing of the past by the time John Gore reached Shirleys. The day following the affair in the music-room, Stephen Gore drove a jaundice-faced old gentleman in his coach to the house in Pall Mall. They talked gravely together on the road, the rattle of the wheels on the cobbles compelling them to mouth their words almost in each other's ears. The old gentleman wore a white periwig, and a kind of gown or cassock of black silk, beneath which protruded a very thin pair of legs, ending in clumsy square-toed shoes. The top of his long cane was made to carry snuff, and the whole front of his silk gown appeared blotched with the powder. His long nose, prying out from his shrewd face, gave one the impression that the habit of snuff-taking had lengthened it abnormally. The skin over either cheek-bone was mottled with small blue veins, and his mouth, long and curved like a half-moon, made one wonder whether he was smiling or sneering. My lord had explained the nature of the case to Dr. Hemstruther, adopting a tone of paternal and chivalrous concern that he contradicted on several occasions by a majestic wink. The physician was a quaint character, for he combined in himself two vices that might have been considered mutually opposed. Yet the resulting energy that arose from the friction between these two passions, the love of precious stones and the love of the eternal feminine, inspired Dr. Hemstruther with a lust to grab every gold carolus he could lay his fingers to. He was a man of great repute, and had made money out of backstairs secrets, though the apothecaries and the midwives hated him, swearing that he knew more than a mere physician should. Now this shrewd, snuffy, peaky-faced little man was ushered about 12 o'clock into Barbara Purcell's room, with my lady and Mrs. Jael to act as guards. The curtains were drawn, and Barbara, dressed in simple black, with her hair upon her shoulders, was lying in the dim light on her bed. She sat up and looked at them with her large eyes as they entered, heavy, languid eyes that seemed to have been empty of sleep. Dr. Hemstruther made a little bow to her, handed his hat and cane to Mrs. Jael, tossed back one of the curtains, and drew a chair up toward the bed. He sat down, keeping his eyes fixed on Barbara's face, and sniffing from time to time as though he missed his snuff. "So you are not feeling in good health, my dear young lady." He had a soft, silky voice, easy to swallow as good wine. Barbara, seated on the bed, stared at him and said nothing. It was easy to see that the girl had suffered greatly, either in mind or body, for the youth seemed to have left her face, leaving it blanched, lined, and very weary. Her eyes looked doubly big because of the shadows under them, and her lips were no longer firmly pressed together. The strain of her sacrifice had broken the heart in her, and she had fallen into a stupor like one whose brain has been numbed by frost. Dr. Hemstruther considered her with his clever eyes. "Can you sleep, my dear?" he asked her at last. "No." She was only dimly conscious that her mother and Mrs. Jael were in the room, and who the little man was she hardly had the will to wonder. "What is it that keeps you from sleep at night?" "Oh, thoughts and other things." "Perhaps you hear voices." She looked at him vaguely. "Yes, voices." "And they talk to you?" "Sometimes. There are often voices with one, are there not?" Dr. Hemstruther rubbed his hands together, forgetting to sniff for a minute or more, a lapse that the sentimental Jael mended. "Are they the voices of people whom you know?" "Sometimes." "And perhaps you hear bells ringing, and other such sounds. Do you ever see the people who talk to you at night?" "Yes, I have fancied it," she answered. "One can fancy so many things in the dark." Dr. Hemstruther gave a jerk of the chin as though to emphasize this as a fact worth noting. He drew his chair nearer, and, taking her hand, looked at it attentively, rubbing the skin with his thumb-nail. Then he asked her a few more questions, keeping his eyes on her and watching her with the alertness of a hawk. My lady and Mrs. Jael saw the girl's eyelids begin to quiver. When Dr. Hemstruther spoke to her she did not answer him, but sat rigid, like a cataleptic, her face betraying no feeling and no intelligence. She remained in some such posture till the old man rose and pushed back his chair. Then a deep breath seemed to come from her with a great sigh, and the lashes closed over her eyes so that she appeared asleep. Dr. Hemstruther watched her for a while, and then turned to Anne Purcell with an expression of sympathetic gravity upon his face. "She is best left alone, madam, at present." And he marched out at my lady's heels, Mrs. Jael following and carrying his hat and cane. Dr. Hemstruther had satisfied a pliant conscience with regard to the nature of the case. He sat, much at his ease, in one of the leather-seated chairs in the room that had been Lionel Purcell's library, and declared his conviction that the girl was of unsound mind. "I can understand, madam," he said, with a courtly little bob of the wig to my lady, "how much exercised you are in mind over your daughter's sanity. At present it is the calm after the storm, the cool dew after the fire of noon. The pulse is depressed, the brain almost torpid, and she did not even hear some of the things I said. Then you heard her confess to hearing voices. That is a very common and significant symptom. My experience goes to prove that some of these cases are the most dangerous and distressing." He nodded his head, took snuff with emotion, and looked under half-lowered eyelids at my lord. "The young gentlewoman must be most carefully watched. It would be expedient to have non compos mentis proven. That gives her guardians the very necessary power to have her cared for, and restrained in some safe place." He was merely advising what he knew Stephen Gore desired in the matter of advice. There was sufficient on which to swear that the girl's mental state was not healthy. Young gentlewomen who fired pistols and made wild accusations against old and honourable friends could scarcely be regarded as either sane or safe. "Then you advise us to apply for powers of custody and restraint?" "Assuredly, my lord, for the patient's sake. She cannot be trusted not to turn against herself. I would suggest that you send her into the country, and put her in charge of some capable relative, some sensible maiden aunt, let us say," and his mouth curved with huge self-satisfaction. "You prefer the country?" "Far away from all distractions and all cares, perfect rest and a convent life. Then I may hope that God's grace will heal her." And he rose with a bow to my lady. Stephen Gore touched him on the shoulder. "Supposing that one of those violent fits should occur, a dose of soothing physic, eh?" "Certainly, my lord, certainly. I will have it compounded and dispatched to you without delay." That same afternoon Stephen Gore drove out in his 2-horse coach, and called on no less a person than Sir Heneage Finch, the Keeper of the Great Seal. My lord and the Chancellor happened to be well disposed toward each other for the moment, and Stephen Gore approached him as a friend, with an air of grief and concern. He spoke most movingly about the child. It was a sad affair, and might have been far sadder but for the mercy of God. Dr. Hemstruther had seen Mistress Barbara Purcell that morning, and given it as his opinion that she was of unsound mind. He had advised immediate seclusion and restraint, warning them that unless she was watched and guarded she might do some damage to herself. My lord's sympathies were importunate and appealing. It would be less humiliating for both the mother and the daughter if the thing could be done quietly and without noise or scandal. The Chancellor, being an amiable man, and not proof against sentiment on occasions, declared himself ready to agree. Yet since it was a question of the King's prerogative, his Majesty would have the matter laid before him quietly. That was the only formality that would be needed, and no very serious one, for the King was grateful to people who took business off his hands, provided they did not relieve him also of the perquisites. In 3 days the whole affair was settled, thanks to my lord's briskness and influence, and his ability to pay. On the 3rd evening he was carried in a sedan to the house in Pall Mall, and spent more than an hour with my lady in her salon. He had made his plans, and all that the mother had to do was to agree with him and to commend him for his ingenuity. "We had better travel at once," he said, when they had talked over every detail. "We can take her in a closed coach, and the nurse and her man can come with us. They are both trustworthy people. You say that there are only a gardener and his wife at Thorn? They must be pensioned and discharged." "Yes, no one else. We must have the girl mewed up before Jack comes back. I shall be able to deal with him. He must not know where we have hidden her." "No, but should he—" "Prove obstinate, we must find a substitute, or pack him off to sea again. The man has a roving disposition. But listen in your ear, Nan. I have discovered some one who has taken a sudden liking to Captain John." "Who?" "Guess." Not poor Barbara, she does not count. No, no, but Hortense." My lady looked at him with open eyes. "Hortense! Why, she has only seen him perhaps twice in her life, and then—" "His Majesty? Oh, Mr. Charles is, well, her banker. It would be like Hortense. It is in the blood, and the southern fire in her." "But how do you know this?" He flipped her playfully on the chin. "How long have I lived in the world, Nan, and how much do I know about women?" Chapter 21 of Mad Barbara by Warwick Deeping. Chapter 21 A blustering, cheerless wind beat up over the hills as John Gore rode the last 5 miles of a 3 days' journey, and saw the vague glimmer of the distant city clinging to the loops of the river Thames. Scudding clouds made the sky cold and full of a grey, hurrying unrest, though it was splashed toward the west with stormy gouts of gold. John Gore rode over the heathlands with the furze bushes shivering as the wind swished through them, and the sandy road was dry and adrift with dust, although the sky looked so wet and sullen. The servant behind him on the cob kept a sharp eye cocked on the hollows of the heath and the knolls of the furze, and nursed his blunderbuss for comfort, though his face looked as red and as round as the sunny side of an apple. Here and there clumps of stunted hollies jostled each other, their whisperings making the evening seem doubly grey and dreary. An unhallowed dusk was creeping over the landscape, an unhallowed dusk that made travellers imagine footpads lurking behind the thorn bushes or the furze. As they trotted downhill, a solitary horseman came creeping up a side track, with his cloak blowing about him and his beaver over his nose. John Gore had a hand ready for a pistol, and the man Tom began to nudge the butt of his blunderbuss against his knee. Yet the stranger appeared more scared of them than they of him, for he went skimming like a swallow into the dusk, itching for his own chimney-glow and the warm side of a safely barred door. John Gore had come by an instinctive distrust of the man Tom's forefinger. He pulled up and sent him ahead. "I shall be safer at your back, Tom, with that fool of yours ready to roar like a boy at the sight of the birch." Tom obeyed him, with rather a shamefaced grin, for 30 miles south of Shirleys his blunderbuss had exploded at 2 in the afternoon, the road running through a wood with a stray cow pushing through the hazel bushes. A scattering of slugs and buckshot had pattered into the grass beside John Gore's horse, for Tom's forefinger had a habit of crooking itself for comfort round the trigger when the road wound into shady bottoms. And if an owl screeched at dusk along a hedgerow, Thomas would give such a start in the saddle that it was a mere turn of the coin whether the flint would come sparking on the powder in the pan. It was growing very grey in the west when they came by Edgware toward Hyde Park, and soon saw the spires of Westminster like faint streaks against a fainter sky. The lights that were looking up in the gathering twilight had a heartening, warming twinkle. Tom slung his blunderbuss by a strap over his shoulder, and began to look buxom and bold enough, as though he already sniffed a hot supper, and felt the ale-mug tickling his beard. They came without event towards St. James's, Charing Village, and Whitehall, and all that sweet savour of courtliness where great gentlemen and roguish maids of honour drank wine and let the warmth thereof mount into their eyes. To John Gore the whole purlieu of the palaces had a mystic glow, a glow that the romance of the heart throws out like a June sun over an old-world garden. His thoughts were very different from those of red-faced Tom, who may have associated the ogle of a pair of merry eyes with the glint of a pewter-pot, for John Gore forgot a 20-mile hunger at a glimpse of the dim trees of St. James's and the imagined gleam of Rosamond's Pool. and hunger in a strong man is an earnest pleader. Therefore romance had the greater glory, and even so the queen thereof, a girl in a black dress, with white bosom and white arms, and eyes so sombre that the sorrow of the world might have sunk therein. The lower windows of my Lord Gore's house were aglow as John Gore and his man rode up St. James's Street with a homeward clatter over the stones. The iron gates leading into the courtyard at the side of the house stood open, and in the yard itself several coaches were standing without their horses, and a couple of sedan chairs in one corner with the poles piled against the wall. Yet though there was as much talking going on as in the parlour of a riverside tavern, there was not such a thing as a servant to be seen. As John Gore rolled out of the saddle, being a little stiff after 3 days' riding, a couple of red faces were poked out of the near window of one of the coaches. The postillions and footmen had taken their masters' places, issued invitations to the chairmen and the grooms, and were all much at their ease with the beer-mugs passing round, and one of my lord's cook-boys playing powder-monkey, and running round from coach to coach with a great can and an apron full of bread and cheese. In one of the carriages, that was upholstered in orange and blue, a fat chairman had stuck a farthing candle on the prong of a dung-fork, and so arranged the primitive candle-stand by leaning it against the door that the company within had a light to drink by, though the upholsterings might suffer from the droppings of the tallow. Even my lord's grooms were making familiar with plush and scarlet cloth and stamped leather, with their heavy stable-boots planted where a satin slipper or a silver-buckled shoe alone had the right of repose. The impudent roguery of it so tickled John Gore that he gave the 2 men at the near window a gruff "Good evening," coarsening his voice so that they should think him one of themselves. "Hello, be that you, Sam Gibbs?" "Samuel it is, old codger. Liquor going?" "A hogshead full. Come inside, there's room for a porker." John Gore laughed. It was dark in the yard, and the men could not recognize him. "Whose coach?" he asked. "This here, old Porteus Panter's. And pant he would, the liquoring old scoundrel, if he knew what honest fellows were warming his cushions. Come along in, lads. Skin of my eyes, where's that damned boy with the beer?" "I'll go and clap the horses in, and come and clink mugs." He walked toward the stables, leading his horse by the bridle. Catching the man Tom while he was still staring at the dim but vociferous vehicles in the yard, he slapped him lightly on the shoulder. "Keep mum, Tom, my lad. There is some fun here. Put the horses in, and swing your heels on the manger for half an hour." John Gore managed to slip into the house by the garden entry, and making his way along a passage, reached the door of the dining-room without meeting any of my lord's servants. Supper was over, and the gentlemen were at their wine, and talking so hard that a company of carol-singers might have struck up in the courtyard without being noticed. John Gore turned the handle and walked in, top-boots, riding-cloak and all, dusty and a little hot. His father sat with his back to him at the head of the long table, with some dozen guests talking and drinking on either side hereof. Seated on Stephen Gore's right hand was one of the gentlemen who had been at Bushy those few days in the summer. He was the first to recognize the intruder, and welcomed him with a laugh and an upraised glass of wine. "All hail, John Gore! Here we are, all on the right side of the table, as yet." John Gore's eyes were fixed upon his father. He saw him turn sharply with the look of a man who sees in a mirror the face of an enemy behind his chair. He was on his feet almost instantly, his buxom face pleasant as a glass goblet full of Spanish wine. "Jack, my lad, this is well timed. We are all friends here, or should be. Gentlemen, my son, Captain John Gore, just out of the saddle from Yorkshire. Never mind your boots, boy. You have a hungry look and a dry look. Pull the bell-rope, Lance, and I'll thank you. Supper is the song that a man wants to hear after a hard day's ride." A boy in a pink velvet coat, and with the grand airs of a Lord Chamberlain, rose and offered John Gore his chair. The sea captain bowed to the youngster in turn, though the child's attitude of condescension was vastly quaint to a man who had dared more adventures in 1 year than the young fop would meet in a lifetime. "You seem to have left a great many of your friends outside in the cold, gentlemen," he said, still standing, and looking down the long table. "My father has enough chairs, and more than enough liquor." His coming had brought a momentary lull with it, and not a few of the gentry at the table were staring with some curiosity at a man who had seen the inside of a Barbary prison. My lord caught his son's words. "What are you saying, Jack?" "These gentlemen have left some of their friends outside in their coaches. Sir Porteus, sir," and he bowed to an apoplectic old fellow with a fringe of white hair and a tonsure like a monk's. "There are people in your carriage. I trust you have not been too modest." The baronet stared boozily across the table. "People in my coach, sir?" "Certainly, and drinking small beer when they should be drinking sherry." John Gore had such a stern and serious way with him at times that casual acquaintances might have set him down as a Puritan, with none of the sly, jesting spirit behind his swarthy and imperturbable face. "I assure you, sir, there were gentlemen seated inside your coach. My father's house is not so niggardly." Stephen Gore caught his son's eye and twinkled. A servant came in at the same opportune moment, having taken fully 3 minutes to answer the bell. "Here, Jeremy, sirrah. Sir Porteus has left some gentlemen to wait in his coach. Desire them to join us. My table is big enough." The man stared, and then appeared in a great hurry to go about his master's business. But my lord hindered him. "Jeremy, you rascal, come here. Pardon me, Porteus," and my lord assumed his most impressive manner. "Perhaps you had better call these friends of yours in to us." "I should recommend the other gentlemen to do likewise," said John Gore, gravely. "Sir Porteus is not the only culprit. The more the merrier." The curiosity of the whole room appeared piqued. Several of my lord's guests pushed their chairs back and made toward the door. But what Sir Porteus and the rest of them said when they poked their heads into the windows of their respective coaches, no one but a hostler could possibly confess. The tallow dip of the pitchfork was knocked over by a judicious fist, but not before it had gutted all down the cushions of the door. There was a sudden exodus of stable boots and small clothes into the dark, and from the whistling and hissing in the stable, any innocent man might have imagined that horses had never been so carefully rubbed down after a 2-mile drive. The boy with the beer can was the only thing captured, and most unjustly cuffed because his ears happened to be at the right level for the easy exercise of a gentleman's hand. It was well after midnight before Stephen Gore and his son were left alone in the great dining-room, with the air thick with the fumes of tobacco and of wine. John Gore opened the windows that faced the street. His father was standing by the Jacobean fireplace, with one elbow on the ledge of the carved oak overmantel, and the stump of a little brown cigarro between his fingers. He was frowning to himself, and looking at the dying fire upon the irons, for a log fire had been burning, though it was still September. John Gore pulled out a short clay pipe and a tortoise-shell box from a pocket. He filled the pipe leisurely, and lit it with a splinter of burning wood that he picked up with the tongs. "Well, Johnny, how was Yorkshire?" My lord, like a father, showed no discretion or sense of proportion, either in the diminutives or in the vernacular renderings of his son's name. Moreover, the Yorkshire moors were very far away, and a more vivid vista blotted them into the distance. "Shirley's has changed very little. They have a new pump in the village. All the farms are in good fettle. Swindale seems as honest as such men ever are." My lord appeared distraught and preoccupied. "How are old Peter Hanson and his woman? Does she still wear a farthingale?" "Well, as ever, like the solid north country folk they are. I have no news, save that the new pump's leaden snout was cut off the first week it was put up, and that a couple of deer were shot at Shirley's 3 days afterward. How have things passed here in the world?" My lord put his cigarro to his lips, drew a deep breath, and expelled the smoke slowly, watching it curve under the hood of the chimney. "Oh, somewhat sadly. I have a thing to tell you, Jack." John Gore's face darkened perceptibly. "News?" "Yes. After all, it may not concern you much. At least, I trust not. We all have our little impulses, our chance inclinations. Do you remember, Jack, something I said to you in this very room the night you fought Phil Pembroke?" John Gore remembered that something very keenly. His eyes betrayed as much. "Does it concern Barbara Purcell?" My lord gave him one look, and then threw the stump of his cigarro into the fire. "It does, poor child. She has gone stark mad. There's the blunt truth, Jack. If I have hit you hard, take it in the face like a man, and forget." End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Mad Barbara by Warwick Deeping. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 22. John Gore asked few questions that night, but went to his room with a silent and impenetrable air that refused to betray any inward bleeding of the heart. His reserve challenged my lord to decide whether the son was really unconcerned, or whether he hid what he might feel beneath a casual surface. For Stephen Gore had spoken with great pathos of this maid's tragedy, and had tempted his son with a display of sympathy, to make some sentimental confession of faith. But John Gore had knocked his pipe out against the hood of the fireplace, pulled off his heavy boots, and pretended that he was sleepy after a 40-mile ride and a good supper. He had taken one of the candles from the table and gone to his room, leaving his father no wiser as to what the son felt or what he knew. John Gore did not sleep that night, despite the September wind over the open country, and the dust that had been blown into his eyes. He had left my lord that he might be alone, and escape that parental curiosity and concern that grated upon the raw surface of his consciousness. For, strong man that he was, he had felt sick at heart over the news of the girl's madness. It had come as a shock at the end of a day of dreams, sudden as a musket ball lodged beneath the ribs, making him faint with the pain of it, and with an inward flow of blood. In those few seconds when his father had spoken to him, he had realized how deeply he had pledged himself to that mystery of mysteries. It had laid bare the truth to him as a knife lays bare the bleeding heart of a pomegranate. John Gore left the candle burning and sat at the open window, his arms crossed upon the window ledge. It was an attitude of one whose eyes gazed out into the night with sadness and great awe, while the soul went down into the deep to drink bitterness bravely to the dregs and gain new strength thereby. He was still there, fully dressed, when the candle guttered in the candlestick, throwing up spasmodic gleams of light before dying into the dark. The dawn came up and found him there, like one who has kept watch all night on the deck of a great ship before a battle. With men who live the life of action, the coming of each day brings a fresh impulse and fresh inspiration. John Gore seemed to throw off the stupor of the night as the greyness of the dawn deepened into bands of blue and gold across the east. He shook himself, dashed cold water over his head and face, and, putting on fresh linen and new clothes, went down into the house before a servant so much as stirred. Opening the street door, he met the dewy breath of the morning and all the silent and gradual glamour of the dawn. He was not the man to mope and write sonnets in a corner, or to surrender a strenuous will to feeble speculation. Wandering down to the river, he hired a waterman, who happened to be industriously early with a pot of paint down by Charing Stairs, and, making the man row him into mid-stream, he stripped and plunged and swam a good half-mile with the tide, feeling the fitter for it in body and heart. Returning, he breakfasted alone, and inquiring from the man Rogers, learned that my lord had rung for his morning cup of chocolate, which he always drank in bed. He heard also the account of how Sparkin had been sent to school some days ago, for John Gore had entered the youngster as a boarder at St. Paul's. He had been packed off, as Mr. Rogers described it, like a pressed man to a king's ship, swearing that he would desert at the first chance, and cut the servant's throat who had had the insolence to drag him schoolward by the collar. But Rogers, who had been sent by my lord to inquire after the child, confessed that he had found Sparkin more resigned to his fate. He had fought 3 fights in as many days, and been royally licked in the last encounter. Defeat seemed to have decided Mr. Sparkin to remain, in order to be avenged as honour and the prestige of the past demanded. My lord was luxuriously at his ease, leaning against a pile of pillows in the 4-post bed, when his son paid him a morning call. He lost a little of his dignity in a silk nightcap and a black velvet bedgown, as elaborately belaced as some priestly vestment. But Stephen Gore was still the great gentleman, the man of affairs, the dispenser of favours, as the litter on the quilt testified. Letters, pamphlets, a needy poet's new book of poems, bills, petitions, and what not. The man Rogers was laying out shirts, stockings, and silk underwear, preparing for that most solemn ceremonial, the sacrament of the toilet. "You can leave us, Rogers, for half an hour. If any of my people call, keep them waiting till I ring." John Gore had opened the window and stood looking down into the little garden at the back of the house. "My dear Johann, I am not seasoned like you to sea breezes. Please pity my grey hairs, my son. I allow no draughts till I have gotten me my periwig. Ha! What's this? Will your honour put such and such a matter before the Duke of York? Yes, of course, dirty work as usual. Let it bide. I hope you have got rid of the saddle-ache, Jack, my fellow. My business hour, this. Look at all this infernal paper. It is an amazing pity that so many people should learn to write." He was picking up letters and papers and tossing them aside, stopping now and again to scribble notes upon his tablets. "I had a secretary, Jack, for a year, but I distrust the tribe. I find that they are always selling one's secrets behind one's back. Is this a filial visit, or am I to include it among my business?" John Gore was watching his father with those dark, intent eyes of his. "I want to speak to you about Barbara Purcell." My lord threw his tablets upon the bed, and looked at his son with questioning keenness. It was still of vital interest to him to discover whether this sea rover had lost his heart or no. "Tell me one thing first, Jack. Had you any strong fancy for the girl?" "It is 4 months since I smelled the sea, sir." "Then she had some flavour for you, beyond the mere scent of a petticoat?" "Yes, a good deal more than that." His father regarded him with sympathetic solemnity. Yet my lord's attitude betrayed the fact that even a clever man of the world may prove shallowly pompous in dealing with a son. "I gave you all the information I have, Jack, last night. If you care to see the pistol mark the poor child made on me, the coat is hanging in that cupboard." John Gore kept his place. "You said, sir, that she believed that you knew the name of her father's murderer." "Some such madness, Jack, but I can assure you that it was a most unholy, startling incident. I can see her now standing like a young figure of fate, with a pistol in her hand and her eyes like 2 live coals. I told her to go to bed, and then she fired at me. Southern blood, Southern blood! Not that I bear any malice against the poor thing, John, though she was so near sending me to my account with all my sins upon my head. What more do you want to know?" "Where she is." My lord pushed some of the papers aside with a trace of impatience. "Safe and well cared for, Jack. Dr. Hemstruther's commands. We applied to the Chancery." "Where, sir, did you say?" "The child has everything that can make life easy." "You have not told me yet, sir, where she is." My lord swung to one side of the bed, and putting an arm round the carved corner post, looked straight into his son's face. "You want to know the one thing, Jack, that I have not the least intention of telling you." "And why not, sir?" "Why not?" And Stephen Gore threw himself back again upon the pillows with some of the dramatic action that he could make appear so natural. "Look you, most obstinate of bulkheads, do you care one brass culverin for the girl? Answer me that." There was no need for the answer. My lord galloped on. "Do you want her to come by her reason and her right mind again? You will protest that you do, of course. Once more, John, my son, would you like to see your love making mouths at you, gnawing her bib, and perhaps shouting like a fishwife? You will protest, perhaps, that you do not." John Gore stood very still about 2 paces from his father's bed. His eyes had a gleam of fierceness in them, for even the possible truth filled him with an impulse to strike the man who uttered it. My lord, who was watching him as a swordsman watches his enemy's eye, changed his tactics abruptly, and held out an appealing hand like an orator pleading for a reasonable understanding. "Don't glare at me, Jack, my boy, as though I had called someone a bona roba. If I have struck hard, it is for your own good. Understand that I am not an old fool, and that I have some sense. You are one of those men who love a woman with the same headlong fierceness with which you would board an enemy's ship. Look at the matter through my eyes. You would only harm the girl by seeing her, for by God's providence she may recover if we rest her as we rest inflamed eyes in the dark. It would only hurt your heart, Jack, if you were to see her as she is now. That is why I am minded to keep temptation out of your way." He threw himself back again upon the pillows, for he had been leaning forward like a preacher over a pulpit rail. "You must trust me, my son. Some day you may thank me for this. I may be pardoned for wishing the best in life for you, for though you may think me a wild old worldling, even a courtier, Jack, may have a heart." He spoke with such a burst of manliness and emotion that John Gore bent over his father's hand. "You are in the right, sir, and I thank you." And he went out from my lord's room touched to the heart, and awed a little by the sudden fervour of this great gentleman of the court, whose flippant splendour had so much of the simpler, braver manhood. Yet so strange and mercurial a thing is temperament that Stephen Gore lay back upon his pillows when his son had gone, with the drawn look of a man caught by some spasm of a faltering heart. He forgot for the moment to ring for Rogers, but sat staring straight before him, his hands moving amid the papers on the quilt. For my Lord Gore, like many a man embarked on crooked courses, was very human, as such men often are. He could not forever be callous in hypocrisy, and a touch of tenderness lurks like a faint red glow amid the cold embers of every heart. Stephen Gore felt a sudden pity for his son that morning. Something drew him toward that silent, brown-faced man, so strong and yet so simple, so wise and yet so ready to believe. Yet what was the use of soliloquizing over broken pitchers and squandered wine? He had entered an alley in which there was no turning, and those who hindered him must be brushed aside. To hesitate would only plunge all those concerned into bitterer complexities, and perhaps into deeper guilt. And yet he could not forget that look in his son's eyes, for the man trusted him, and the man was his own son. "Crooked corners are best left crooked," he said to himself at last, as he reached out a hand toward the bell-rope. "After all, he need not make an Arabella Stuart of the girl. There are handsomer and better-tempered women by the score. Come along, Rogers, I am late as it is. Put my plum-coloured suit out. And have you stropped those razors properly? They were beginning to bite like files." Rogers bustled forward with hot water, scented napkins, and a phial of perfumes. "Yes, sir, they are as sharp as your own wit, sir." "Give me the glass, Rogers. I feel yellow this morning. Do I look it?" "A little tired, sir, perhaps, nothing more." Chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Mad Barbara by Warwick Deeping. Chapter 23. They will tell you in those parts how Waller, the parliamentarian, battered with his cannon the Purcells' house of Thorn, leaving it half ruinous, as a warning to all royalists who felt tempted to trust in the breadth of their moats or the stoutness of their walls. Be the woodland legend what it may, the Purcells were poor after the long war, and Thorn had been for 30 years a haunt of owls and jackdaws, a strange, dim place set in the midst of stagnant water, far from a high road, and hidden by wastes and woods. From broken gable ends and tottering battlements, a red brick tower and a few twisted chimneys rose against the blue. Even in those short years ivy had climbed up over the walls, pouring over the stone sills of the windows, and growing knotty and stout of stem even up to the leaden waterspouts of the tower. When the wind blew from the south-west the whole house seemed to shake and glimmer with the movements of those myriad leaves, and through the windows of roofless rooms you could see the sky redden or grow gold at dusk or sunset. As for the moat, it was a chequer of black and green, with moor-hens swimming on it and water-rats making rippling tracks from wall to wall, while here and there great rambling roses, that had not felt the knife for many a year, poured over the brick parapet, and hung in summer-like banners of green, flowered with crimson and gold. The crown of the bridge had been broken, and several tree-trunks, ranged side to side and banked with earth and brushwood, filled up the gap. The courtyard gate, a new one since Waller's day, seemed the only unruined thing about the place, but the courtyard itself was knee-deep with grass and weeds at hay-time. In the garden there were stretches of turf that had once been lawns, paths that were no longer visible, roses and shrubs growing as they listed, for a corner of the vegetable garden alone had been kept in cultivation. The outhouses and stables in the kitchen court were crumbling and falling in, a quaint medley of ragged thatch and gaunt roof timber, falling plaster and lichened brick. Yet the old thorns that grew in the grass-land beyond the moat, thorn-trees that had given the house a name and were outliving it, stretched out their flat tops like so many pleading and appealing hands. They were white each spring above the green rushes, the brown mole-heaps, and the dew-wet grass, and in the winter the birds flocked to them and fed upon the red berries, welcome, indeed, when the turf was frost-bound or when the snow lay deep. So the old thorns lived on as they had lived for generations, while Thorn crumbled brick by brick, and the ivy, as though yearning to hide its nakedness, made it dim with glimmering green. Thorn had its ghost, and no Sussex churl would come within half a mile of it when dusk began to fall. An old Scotch gardener and his wife had lived there some 10 years, warm and snug in the rain-proof kitchen, daring the devil and all spirits and insects with a handful of good sulphur. McAllister and his dame had been given their quittance that autumn, and had been packed off into some distant county, no man knew why or where, and no man cared. The owls might fledge their broods, the jackdaws build in the chimneys, and the place be given up to all manner of mystery and ghostliness. None had troubled in those parts about Thorn, save one farmer who had needed a new barn, and had driven a waggon over to thieve bricks, and come away with such a scaring that every one believed him when he swore the place was cursed. There were ghosts at Thorn that autumn, but solid, hungry, and most gluttonous ghosts, who seemed to have abundance of good beer and food stowed away in the huge cupboards of the kitchen. The kitchen and the 2 rooms over it had been made habitable for the McAllisters, and were now used by the new spirits who haunted Thorn. A big, stocky man, with a back like a flagstone, a comely, broad-hipped woman, with black eyes and a tight, hard face. They had come there suddenly, when the moon was full, walking by the woodland track, from a great black coach that had set them down upon the high road. One evening in October, as the dusk was falling, the figure of a man, a burly blotch of darkness in the half-light of the yard, came across from an outbuilding that was used as a woodshed, with an apron full of oak blocks for the fire. Farmer Knapp, he who had come to steal bricks, had told how he had come to the gate of Thorn and had seen through the grille, not a foot from his own eyes, a great white face as big as the moon when full. Farmer Knapp had not taken a second look, and although it was only 3 in the afternoon, he had jumped into his wagon and driven off with his cart horses lumbering at a canter. Now the man who crossed the courtyard, carrying his billets of wood, had a piece of white cloth covering his face, tied under the chin and about the forehead, with 2 holes for the eyes and a slit where the mouth should be. The huge calves of the man's legs rubbed together as he walked, and under the brim of his beaver his pate was as bold as the ivory knob of a gentleman's cane. He went down into the kitchen by 3 steps and a short passageway, and tumbled his wood into a corner of the open hearth. At the table the woman was stirring something in a basin. A big black pot hung on a rack and chain over the fire, and on the bricks before the hearth lay a dog of the mastiff breed, who lifted his head and blinked when the man entered. "Supper ready?" "Throw some more wood on, Sim, will you?" The man tossed 2 or 3 blocks into the red heart of the fire, pulled a rough settle forward with one foot, and sat down and stared at the pot. The firelight glittered on the eyes behind the white cloth, showing up the red lids unshaded by the trace of an eyelash. "Lord, what a dull hole this is, or I'm saved." The woman had her sleeves turned up, and her big forearms were brown and comely. "Dull," said the man, "when there's plenty to eat." "And drink, Sim?" "Better than Tyburn or Newgate, anyway. Only there ain't nothing to lay one's fist to, not so much as a dog for old Blizzard to take by the throat. Turn smuggler, my dear, if you want to let blood." The man sniffed at the pot. "Smuggler? No, thank ye. We don't want none of those gentry inside Thorn, stodging about the country for a keg of liquor when we can have it for going to the cupboard. This deuced viz of mine smarts like hot hollands to-night." He untied the strings and turned the mask up, but the woman did not look at him, it being near supper-time and food upon the table. They were not Sussex folk, nor even country people, by their speech, but gentry whose childhood had been passed within hail of Southwark or the Savoy. "Who's going to carry the girls' food up to-night?" The man took an oil flask and a piece of linen from the long shelf above the open fireplace. Over the shelf hung a long gun and a couple of heavy pistols, also a seaman's cutlass and a pair of iron wristlets. He dropped some of the oil on the rag, and began to dab his face with it, blinking his red lids like an owl. "Take it up yourself, Nance. I'm tired." She looked at him with a shrewish lift of the chin. "Tired, you great hulk! Dang those rickety stairs, they make my knees ache. A bat put the candle out last night. Mother of God, I wouldn't be here another week but for the doubloons. Think of the smell of the sausage shops, and the snug little taverns Southwark way. I would give a gold Jacobus to sniff the river mud at low water. They might take us for papers from St. Omer. As for the girl, Black Babs, she's no more mad than I am." The woman had a certain air of culture, the culture, perhaps, of a bold and clever orange girl who had caught some of the courtliness of the playhouses and the gardens. "So we are papists," quoth the man, still dabbing his face, "and to say whether a wench is mad or not is none of our business." "It's my business, Sim, to see no one drops a noose over my neck." "Noose be damned. When a great gentleman opens his purse, you slut, wise folk ask no questions." "Perhaps not. Lift the pot off. My Lord Pomposity wishes the girl mad, I gather, and mad she will be in 6 months, with the winter coming, or maybe stiff as a frozen bird. Then it will be Old Drury and Whitefriars again, as likely as not. Captain Grylls will be blackguarding it this way with orders before long. They must get us fresh supplies sent in before December." "That's the real business of life, Sim, to be sure. There's the girl's bread and dripping. Run up with it like a good lad, or I shall spoil the pudding. You had better take the lantern. The old tower is full of bats and draughts." The man put the oil flask on the shelf, and dropping the white cloth over his face, took down a horn lantern from a beam and lit the candle in it with a burning brand from the fire. He trod on the dog's paw in the doing of it, and gave the beast his boot in the ribs because he presumed to snarl at him. "Anything to wash it down?" "I filled the jug this morning." Simon Pinniger picked up the pewter plate and marched off swinging the lantern. From the kitchen a passage led to what had been the hall, now rafterless, with the stars blinking between ivied walls. A flight of steps led to a door that opened into a lower story of the tower. Simon put the lantern down, pulled out a key, and, unlocking the door, picked up the lantern again and began to climb the interminable stair. Thud, 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 up into the darkness, with the light from the lantern swinging this way and that, and the raw cold of the autumn night breathing in at the open squints, and through the shot-holes that could be seen here and there in the walls. Simon Pinniger climbed 60 steps or so, passing 2 narrow landings before he came to a door with a bar across it. He put down the lantern, unlocked the door, lifted the bar that worked upon a pin, and, opening the door about a foot, pushed the plate in with the toe of his boot. "Supper," was all he said. Then, after the turning of the clock and the creaking of the bar, the thud, thud died down again into the darkness of the stair. Only one thing moved for the moment in the tower room, and that a mouse, who came out boldly to nibble at the bread on the pewter plate. A single window, high up in the wall and closed with stanchions, let in the brown gloom of the dusk and the glitter of a star. There was no fire, no furniture to speak of, and nothing that could be broken and used as an edge to cut and wound. In one corner stood a truckle bed, and sitting thereon a still, shadowy figure, whose face showed a grey oval in the darkness. The place seemed far above all sound, though the wind might moan there and shake the ivy on the wall. The figure rose from the bed and moved toward the door. It went on its knees there, and with cold hands began to crumble some of the rough bread. A tiny shadow crept up toward the white fingers and took crumbs. It was so little a thing, too small to be caressed, yet it had grown tame in one short month, and, above all, it was alive. Barbara, kneeling there, fed the mouse with crumbs, and ate some mouthfuls of the bread herself, for there was nothing for her to do at Thorn but to watch for this friend at dusk, or for the white pigeons that sometimes flew up to her window during the day. She could see nothing of the world, not even the waving woods, but only the clouds moving, and a few stars at night. One book they had given her, and that an old Bible bound in faded red leather. She had read it twice from cover to cover, sometimes with listlessness, sometimes with fierce hunger, sometimes with tears, and for an hour or more she would sit on the bed and think, her white face thin and questioning, but with no madness in her eyes. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Mad Barbara by Warwick Deeping. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 24. There was a shadow of unrest over England that year, as though each man distrusted his neighbour, and was ready to accuse his own friend of treason and Papish practices, of taking the French king's money, or of complicity in some wild and improbable plot. There had been no rush of the mob as yet, no Protestant fury, but the discontent and the fear and the distrust were there, spread on either side by vague whisperings and all manner of monstrous rumours. Men were seen to sit cheek by jowl in the taverns, and talk of an armed landing, of a second massacre of St. Bartholomew, when all good Protestants were to be murdered in their beds. There were tales of Jesuits swarming over the countryside like silent night-flying moths. The Catholic lords had long been arming, so it was said, and were ready even to murder his Majesty the King, and set up the Duke of York, that morose-faced inquisitor, in his stead. John Gore, who had suspected his father of being trammelled up in some secret undertaking, had called on my Lady Purcell one grey afternoon, and was walking home alone across the park, taking a circuit so as to pass by Rosamond's Pool. He had been often of late to the house in Pall Mall, drawn thither by instincts that he could not smother. He went to hear news, and more than once he had spoken to Anne Purcell of her daughter. But my lady had set her mouth very firmly, and made him believe that the affair was too poignant for her. He had even questioned Mrs. Jael quietly, and the woman had drawn 2 gold pieces from him, with her emotional loquacity and the trickle of tears down her plump cheeks. My lord had advised patience, and John Gore had done his best to abide by the advice, suspecting no treachery in it, and hoping for all that God might give. Yet often he rebelled against his blindness, yearning but to know the place where they had hidden her away. The truth might have been had by bribery, but John Gore had no reason as yet to persuade him to bribe his father's servants, nor would he have stooped to such a thing without great need. Yet the girl had vanished out of the world, and there was no horizon toward which he might turn his eyes and know that she was there, like a light beyond the hills. In his heart he kept her image bright, even as she had appeared to him those summer days, swarthy and sorrowful, with silent lips and watchful eyes. Dusk was falling as John Gore crossed the park, and there were few people strolling along the paths. He had come close to Rosamond's Pool when he saw 2 figures leaning over the rail, with the collars of their cloaks turned up and their hats down over their eyes. They turned from the water as John Gore came by, and even in the dusk he recognized the taller of the 2 as Stephen Gore, his father. The son stopped and saw his father give a tug to the shorter man's cloak. "Well met, Jack. You are the man I want. This, Captain Grylls, is that son of mine who has sailed a ship farther than any of your sea-going bravos." My lord's companion bowed and lifted his hat. He was pock-marked and somewhat overdressed, with a hook nose and a sharp dry mouth. One of his shoulders appeared higher than the other, and his head set a little askew upon his neck. "The great navigator! Proud to approach you, sir. We are mere duck-pond gentry, some of us, though we may have fought the Dutch." His nose wrinkled queerly when he smiled, and he displayed a row of teeth discoloured by tobacco. John Gore judged the man to be a rogue and a hanger-on to the skirts of patrons about the court. His eyes had a knack of seeming to look both ways, and no doubt he would have been pleased if he had been able to see behind him like a hare. "Attend to this little affair of mine, Grylls. I shall expect you some day this week." "Yes, my lord. You know me to be as ready as a clock." "Yet clocks need winding, Grylls." The man laughed politely, as though he saw the gilt edge of the jest, and, lifting his hat, moved away with the discretion of an underling who has learned to tell instantly when he is no longer wanted. My lord opened his cloak and set his hat at a happier angle. "Come along, Jack. I have business for you to-night." Now John Gore carried one matter uppermost in his mind that evening. My lord seemed to read the nature of his son's thoughts, and dashed any illusion with the candour of a friend. "No, nothing of that kind, Jack. I had news this morning. She is well in body, but she has not changed greatly yet in soul. Put it behind you, and wait for the rest. After all, there are stirring things to be done in the world, and a maid should not make a man's blood turn to milk." John Gore walked on in silence, his father humming a tune that sounded very much like a chant. For my Lord Stephen was a papist, though the conversion had not come till his maturer years, and whether it had been a question of conscience or of statecraft, none but a Jesuit could have explained. "Who was the man you were talking with by the pool?" "Grylls? A poor, willing kind of rogue who has learned to make himself of use. Small fry, Jack, to float in shallow streams. I have deeper waters for you, sir, with all your guns and tackle." There was a gleam of grimness in his eyes as he spoke. "The Bible saith, Jack, put not your trust in princes. A wise saying, truly, yet I have a wiser, and that, sir, is, put not your faith in the mob. Trust the sheep-dog, and watch the wag of his tail, rather than bump and scurry and run with the flock. Yonder lies our anchorage." A house rose before them amid the trees, its windows dark save for one in the first story, and that dim with the shadow of drawn curtains. John Gore recognized it as the house of Hortense. They were crossing the ground where he had fought my Lord Pembroke that wet night in summer. "Is your call there, sir?" Stephen Gore glanced this way and that, and then laid a hand on his son's shoulder. "Yes, join with me, Jack. There are nobler prizes to be won here than you will ever take at sea." They entered the Mazarin's house through the little garden door, behind which some one seemed to have been waiting, for it was opened directly my lord had given 5 sharp knocks. The door closed behind them, and in the dim light John Gore saw the janitor was a woman. My lord walked straight ahead toward a back stairway as though he knew the intimate secrets of the house. John Gore was following him, when he felt the woman touch his arm. "Of your courtesy, sir, the lock was caught. Will you turn it for me?" She spoke with a slightly foreign accent, drawing out every syllable with quaint directness. "Have you the key?" "Here it is, sir. Fie, now, I have dropped it. How very clumsy!" She began to draw her skirts this way and that in the narrow passage, peering for the thing in the dark, and even sweeping the floor with her hands. John Gore bent down to help her, and in the quest the woman's hair brushed up against his cheek. She gave a sudden, thrilling little laugh, and took John Gore softly by the ear. "So you have come to join us, Signor Giovanni. That is very sweet of you. We need brave men." To be held by the ear by a waiting woman surprised the sea captain for a moment. He took a firm but meaning hold upon the lady's wrist, but with the other hand she put back the hood of the cloak she wore. "Ah, how good! I have played a trick upon you both. Have you never been held by the ear, Sir John, by some pretty little waiting-maid? Now do not pretend, Sir John. I shall be able to tell a different tale." She seemed to grow taller suddenly, and to radiate splendour even in the dusk. Her voice changed also from a mincing treble to a full contralto that seemed made for song. John Gore knew that it was Hortense. "Madam," he said, "I beg your pardon." She laughed with mischievous charm, and drew her hand away slowly, so that it brushed his cheek. "How simple of you," said John, "and yet you can handle a sword so well. Shall we follow my lord?" "And the key?" he asked, with a glance at the floor. "Is in the lock, and the lock is turned. So you see." She dropped the cloak that she was wearing, and as they ascended into the light he could see the splendour of her dress gleam up gradually, the colour of her hair and the compelling beauty of her face. Her eyes seemed full of sparkles of light, her lips red, soft, and mobile, as though on the brink of a smile. She paused at the head of the stairway and stretched out an arm across the passage that led toward a room whence light and the sound of voices came. John Gore paused also, and she stood and looked into his eyes with an earnestness that made him colour. "I am serious now, Sir John. We are risking our necks here. It may be no mere supper-party and a trifling loss at cards. You are young, and then you have been in other lands. And yet, after all, I am speaking to you as though you were a boy." For a moment he could only look at her, for she was so very lovely and so womanly that it was not in a man's nature not to look. "I am in the dark," he said at last. "Are you afraid of the dark?" "I have dared it before, for the sake of adventure." She still stood, regarding him with her great eyes, so liquid, so mysterious, and perhaps a little sad. John Gore saw her press something to her bosom, and when she took her hand away he saw that it was a little silver crucifix hung by a chain about her neck. Her lips moved as though she were repeating some Latin prayer. Fides Sanctissima, Maria Beatissima, Pater Noster in Coelho. And then she swept forward toward the room, and John Gore followed her lest she should think him afraid. The room was quite small, panelled with dark oak, and with a fire burning upon the open hearth at one end. A long table stood in the centre. About it were seated some 60 men, and at the head thereof, in a great leather-backed chair, Coleman the Jesuit, chaplain to the Duchess of York. My Lord Gore exchanged glances with Hortense. "It was you, then, most magical Diane, playing porter at the door. I wondered what had become of our friend here. Had I known—" and he laid a hand over his heart. Hortense turned her head for an instant with an audacious flash of the eyes at John Gore. "I will not betray him, but he wished to help a woman find a key that she had not dropped, gallant Sir John," and the look she gave him would have made the greatest epicure push his plate aside and talk. Father Coleman, infamous or sainted Coleman, as men were soon to call him, sat at the head of a table that was covered, not with papers and epistles, but with dishes of fruit, wine-glasses, bottles, comfits, and spiced cakes. The gentlemen about it appeared to have easy consciences and pleasant thoughts. They were debonair, familiar, talkative, very much in the grace of pleasure. The panelling of the room was fanatical and austere, yet the duchess's chaplain had cheerful cheeks and vivacious eyes, and bore himself with that easy-flowing worldliness that carries a clever priest into the intimate life of palaces. It might have been nothing more than a gathering of lords and gentlemen who gossiped over their wine, comparing their views, and exchanging the ordinary news of the day. There appeared to be no elaboration of secrecy, no self-conscious sense of urgent peril. They ladled out punch or filled their wine-glasses, smiling across the table at one another, and listening to little pieces of scandal with the ingenuous cheerfulness of country ladies over their dishes of tea. All those present appeared very interested in the breeding of race-horses, and the technicalities of the sport were bandied to and fro, even Father Coleman appearing to be possessed of very pronounced views upon so unpriestly a subject. They talked much of a famed French horse called Soleil d'Or, and also of a Dutch stallion whose breed none of the gentry seemed to fancy. There were a great number of noted beasts in the shires whose names and points were familiar to the whole table: Norfolk Joe, Northern Star, Jenny of Cheshire, Hertford Prince. Such were some of the many titles that John Gore heard passing from mouth to mouth. Being a seaman, he felt himself out of touch with the horse gossip of the day. That some gentlemen contemplated introducing a stud of French mares into the country was news whose significance was largely lost to him. He knew very little of Italian roans and Spanish jennets, nor why oak apples should be spoken of as a sire who had not been properly watched. There was no coarseness in their gossiping, and John Gore, who sat at one corner of the table close to Father Coleman and Hortense, saw no need for either the priest or the lady to look embarrassed. The gentleman was still intent upon the topic when the Mazarin leaned over the side-rail of her chair and drew a plate of grapes toward her. She cut a small bunch and began to eat the grapes one by one, doing it so daintily that it was good to watch her white hands and her full red mouth. She glanced now and again at the man beside her, with a charming suggestion of coy interest in him that contrasted with the mischievous mood of an hour ago. "You know more of the ships than of horses, Sir John." She gave him the title as though it provided her with an excuse for mouthing two very pretty syllables where one might have sounded blunt and clumsy. John Gore looked at her with his grave eyes and smiled. "At the Nore you would have heard ships talked of in much the same fashion." "Yes, a sea-captain must love his ship as an Arab loves his horse, if she can spread her wings well and swing her shot home into an enemy." "Truly, Sir John, even I should love to go to sea and sail away for leagues and leagues, away to those dim islands where everything is new and strange. I feel like a little ignorant girl when I think of what you men of the sea have seen." She looked at him so delightfully, with her eyes full of wonder and interest, that a far stronger man than Ulysses might have lingered to tell her of the splendours of unsailed seas. John Gore discovered himself in Calypso land, with white hands pushing dishes of fruit toward him and proffering Spanish wine. He was telling her of the grim passage of Cape Horn, and of the savages who lived in those wild parts, when a sudden gleam from his inner consciousness swept across his mind. He remembered how he had told the same tales to that silent, sad-eyed girl, whose life had had no glamour of homage in it, and whose tragic face looked out at him from a mist of madness. He grew silent quite suddenly, bringing his voyages to a clumsy and confused end, and not noticing the questioning look in Hortense's eyes. He felt instinctively that she was nearer to him than he wished. Her beauty became a sudden glare, clashing with something more spiritual, more mysterious, and more strangely sad. He was glad when some of the gentlemen rose and began to kiss Father Coleman's hand. They went down by the same stairway, Hortense herself lighting them with a little Italian lamp. She was very close to John Gore in the passageway, her dress brushed against him, while the lamp she carried made her beauty seem softly brilliant amid the shadows. "Good night, my lord. Good night, Sir John. I hope we have not frightened you very greatly." She searched him with her great eyes, so full of intentness for the moment that he felt their power and could not look away. "You must tell me more of those wild seas, the great rivers and the Indians, the gold and the pearls." He bowed to her a little gauchely, but did not touch her hand, and he had a last glimpse of her standing there with the glow from the lamp upon her face as he went out into the night. My lord appeared in excellent spirits as they walked home together in the dark. His son had a silent mood upon him, and Stephen Gore found nothing in his silence to be reproved. "Pearls and gold and strange lands, that is Hortense," he said suddenly as they entered the broad street. "A splendid creature, too, in heart as well as in body." John Gore walked on with no sound save the crisp beat of his feet upon the stones. "What was the meaning of it all, sir?" he asked at last. "Meaning, Jack?" "Yes." "Why, just what you please, my lad. We choice spirits and good Catholics love to have our gossip, and you can find in it just as much as you wish to know. You must come with me again, and tell the lady more about the pearls and the gold and the strange lands. I tell you, John Gore, there is something for you to discover more mysterious and alluring than anything Cortez and all the Spaniards discovered in the New World over the sea." Chapter 25